Hi, with everything changing in the world, there's a new approach to connectivity and security called SASE. But even more, there's a new way of doing SASE that goes beyond simply looking at access and how your people get to information, but what they do with it. As part of our 5 Steps to SASE series on how to put data first in your SASE. So welcome. Today's session is on protecting remote workers on the web and in the cloud. I'm Jim Fulton, Director of SASE and Zero Trust Solutions at Forcepoint, and with me today is Dr. Chase Cunningham, Chief Strategy Officer at Ericom, and one of the people behind the meteoric rise of Zero Trust. Hi, Chase. Thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. It's always fun talking to you.
So with people working in multiple places, not just at home anymore, but now there's talk of hybrid offices, people going in a day or two a week, even traveling and so forth. What are some of the big changes in the industry that you're seeing organizations begin to wrestle with?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things is that we've really jumped the shark on whether or not this is local. And what I mean by that is I have conversations now. I have a conversation tonight with folks in Japan. It's global. So this is not just inherent to the US. For some reason, we seem to kind of get gravitated around that this is a US problem. This is global in nature. And the follow on to that is really that everybody everywhere has moved so quickly to remote. But on top of that is the remote issue combined with BYOD. A lot of the organizations out there have finally gravitated to, I don't need to ship people Dell laptops or HP laptops or whatever. They've got, most folks have a laptop, most folks have a phone, most folks have internet. Some of it's not that great, but whatever. And they're just jumping to make that a possibility. I think the numbers that I saw said there was a 77% increase in BYOD in 1 year, which is just astronomical. So coupled with the move to remote, we now have this issue of accounts, accesses, devices, and these other things that we talk about in the context of ZT that just have been dumped on us to figure out how to secure.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've been seeing is an acceleration of data and apps moving to the cloud. A year ago, we were all talking about digital transformation and the journey to the cloud. Now that basically stopped because everything is already out there. We're beginning to see a shift as well that now, in part because of things like BYOD and other issues, how people are using security, how they're using applications and data in the cloud is changing. For example, a shift away from backhauling. Are you seeing that same sort of trend?
Yeah, the move here is really in line with I kind of think what happened a century ago or not quite a century, but close to a century ago, when we kind of went from rural roads to the federal highway system, and all of a sudden it was like, hey, we can go anywhere we want. All you got to do is hop in a car and fill it full of gas and go, and you could kind of get wherever you wanted. But at the same time, they had to figure out, well, gosh, what do we do with all these new moving parts, and how do we legislate this thing, and how do we have command and control of ins and outs of states and keep up that infrastructure? And that's kind of the same thing we're seeing now in the digital space, where we're moving very, very fast. We have the, I guess you'd say, broad internet highway, but we still have got this kind of kludgy coupling of how do we get to that highway system. Most of the time, it seems like the push is to go as direct as possible, which can be good, but it also does introduce a potential avenue for compromise if you don't pay attention to how you get to that highway.
And I think that's a really nice analogy, because what we're seeing is a lot of organizations that, back in March of last year, when everything went sideways, that a surprising number of organizations still had people VPNing in, not just for private apps, kind of get to the separate topic, but because they were using on-prem based security appliances. And the issues that then came up is they started realizing we have all these people who are out close to the web. They have direct connections. They have Microsoft 365, which says thou shalt not put proxies in between us. suddenly sending traffic, back over VPN through various on-prem appliances and eventually squeaking its way out through the backcountry roads, until it finally found the major highways once again. What in that? What aspects, beyond the sort of the obvious, perils of using on-prem solutions when everything's out in the cloud already? What are the biggest things you're hearing people sort of react to today that maybe was surprising a year ago?
Well, I think what surprises me the most is that it's kind of funny because you used to have a lot of folks that were very reticent to let you monitor and look at what's going on with their infrastructure and their machine and whatever else. And I'm not necessarily sure if it's just been okay, we finally jumped the shark and we can monitor you without being draconian, or whether it is folks generally accepting that you're better if you're sort of looked at and taken, to task on security. But the issue that we used to have to fight with people about, like, look, I need to at least sort of know what's going on with your system so that I can keep us secure. Like the trade-off of, if you want to be remote and you want to be BYOD, great, I'll make that happen. Like, that's part of my business plan. However, the back and forth here is, you need to let me look and see what you're doing and if there's an infection so that I can respond.
Mm-hmm. And in your new role at Ericom, one of the things that Ericom is well known for, of course, is bringing sort of new approaches to securing access to the web, remote browser isolation, and so forth. We've seen this really in the last year become, in some ways, an overnight sensation that might have been several years in the making, to use the old joke. But it really now is playing an increasing role.
Yeah, I mean, you see this from a lot of competitors, right? It's showing up from major players in the space that all of a sudden have kind of rocketed up to where Ericom's been ahead of the curve with, like, we offer RBI as well because it works.
Yeah. And what's intriguing to me is how, it started off as just okay, well, for certain use cases when browsing the web, here's a good way to insulate against threats. And in fact, is becoming kind of an interesting technique for taking a step further and providing a greater level of control over how people use those resources, whether it's web-based content or cloud-based apps, or ultimately even internal web-based applications. For example, being able to provide read-only access and things like that. It looks like this is sort of the beginning of a new trend towards being able to layer additional controls onto existing applications that you don't have the flexibility to go and modify. Is that in line with where you're taking Ericom?
Yeah, I mean, strategically, when we look at it, I mean, I see that there's a massive opportunity there to remove a lot of the load from users, and I think that that's something we need to do more in the security space. And really, the other piece of that is I'll die on the hill. I don't think that ARS has really saved anyone from the infection issues that we've faced. And PowerShell is not an infection, right? PowerShell is a native thing. So doesn't it make more sense to leverage the cloud and those resources and live in that world where I'm okay if I get infected out there in the network, in the cloud, because I don't care. Like, it's a container. If it gets infected, I just reload the container and life goes on. Whereas this nail-biting approach of, I really hope my super amazing signature-based AV catches this newest type of malware, which hasn't worked, just isn't going to make a difference. So from the strategy standpoint, that's why I wrote about RBI a couple of years ago. I think that it really meets the threat where the threat lives, and it gives you an additional boundary, a buffer between infection and cataclysm.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the next step for it, or technologies that then derive from RBI?
I think where we're going to see it go is, and we're already starting to have conversations with this with different government organizations and manufacturing, is that RBI becomes built into more and more browser-based capability for stuff like we don't really think about right now, like IoT, OT, manufacturing, medical devices, those types of deals that have those sort of weird, sort of one-off type of browsers, and being put into that. Because again, most of those systems, I can't really run a lot of AV and all the other things that we would run. So doesn't it make more sense just to pump them through the cloud, have the container do what it does, and call it a day?
Yeah, and especially as we move towards more and more things really doing API level interaction, rather than display oriented interaction. It seems like some of the new generations of API scanners and API isolation systems will play an increasing role as well.
Yeah, I mean, the web is built for this. So the internet is made for this thing. I mean, we all, and I've got a speech that I do where I talk about, like, everybody uses the browser. So why wouldn't you leverage that as a control plane? And it makes a lot of sense when you actually back it up and think about it. And I would say at the end of the day, you're able to go back to the user population and say, are you able to use Chrome? And they say, well, sure. And you go, okay, well, use Chrome. Like, there you go, problem solved. We'll just take that lift off of you. And that's where we start to get real adoption from end users, is security doesn't suck so much.
Right. Yeah, and the more that it's invisible, then I've always been a firm believer that security done right can be an enabler. It can be a positive thing because it allows people to get their job done, to use the information that they need, as opposed to being, the great arbiter of no. So thanks, Chase. I agree that the direction that we're heading, where security becomes more and more just part of the way that people operate, rather than being a destination in and of itself, will be one of the keys to making people productive while keeping business safe at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, statistically speaking, which I love numbers, right? I live, eat, sleep, and breathe data and stats, and 55% of consumers are more willing to do business with an organization that can then tell how they enable security, and 83% of folks that engage in zero trust related security strategies are more engaged with security technology solutions. So if you get to that point where security is easier to use, and you can tell people that buy your technologies and services, this is what we do and why we do it, it's a competitive differentiator. Like, security doesn't have to be just security. Security can be a win for the business.
And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much, Chase, for being able to sit down with us today. And for all of you, thanks for spending the time with us. Hi, everybody. In today's session, we're going to be looking at what are some of the issues surrounding how you can have visibility and control over access to applications in your private data centers or your private clouds without the pain, costs and complexity of using VPNs. Today, I'm joined by Vince Spina, the Senior Vice President of Solutions Engineering here at Forcepoint, and someone who really has visibility into what organizations and government agencies and commercial enterprises are doing around the world for connecting and protecting their remote workers. Vince, welcome.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for having me. It's always great to collaborate and chat with you.
Really appreciate you being able to spend some time with us. When we look at the issues of zero trust and SASE, one of the things that immediately sort of jumped out to a lot of people was that SASE explicitly incorporated notions of the zero trust principles for how to do security into the definition of SASE. SASE is an architecture for delivering security to people everywhere. And so one of the things that they did was to focus on requiring the ability to provide access to applications without the traditional sort of approach that many organizations took of just having people VPN in. To you and what you've seen out there in the real world, why is this such an important topic?
Well, I would say, Jim, first of all, over the last year and a half, we've moved from all of our users being in a controlled environment in their office buildings, getting out to the internet, their applications and their data in a very controlled fashion. The last year and a half, in the situation that we've now moved those knowledge workers into much more kind of remote, out of the office environments. And now our customers are really having to wrestle with where are these users? Are they who they say they are? Where are they going to get their data? And then how do we put all the boundaries and controls around them to make sure that we keep our intellectual property and our assets safe?
And so last year in the great exodus from the office that took place, a lot of our customers sort of did whatever they could to keep providing access. And in many cases, that was providing access to cloud apps. And that's easy. But the harder problem was getting to those internal apps that stubbornly are still living in data centers. And the answer seemed to be, okay, give everybody a VPN client and tell them, okay, go ahead. All you have to do is, and then fill in the blank of the 30 things you have to do as a mere mortal to use a VPN effectively. We saw in that some of the things that we saw included having to really scale up infrastructure, buy a lot more equipment, a lot more networking. And then, one of the big challenges that we heard, and I'd love your thoughts on how we're seeing, is just the user experience became so difficult that so many people, were having to then use VPNs who had never used them before. Are we seeing this around the world?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely are. I mean, it's funny. I come from a networking infrastructure background, and we would consider VPNs to be plumbing. It does one thing really well, which is it creates a direct pipe between a user and a user's data and their apps. But inherently, there's a couple of problems with that. The first thing I want to talk about is when you think about why we put VPNs in there, it's ultimately to remove the basics of allowing compromises to proliferate. And VPNs have to be at the top of that list, because when you think about a VPN, it's a direct channel between users and their data and their apps. But once I connect, any of the badness that might be going on in my home office or around me now follows me in that direct pipe into those internal networks. So you have all the badness of that, and bad actors are taking advantage of that. But also, besides that direct pipe and all that badness coming in, VPNs are expensive. And when I use the term expensive, VPNs are expensive from a performance perspective because there's a lot of overhead that goes with it. They're costly just in the equipment that you have to buy when everybody has to connect via that VPN. And they're also highly complex, which really talks to what you just said, Jim. Outside of the technologists in a company, which is a component of most companies, this is new technology because it's technology you didn't have to use when you're in the office. So when almost 100% of your knowledge workers now are working from home, it created an order of magnitude of complexity and overhead and cost and tickets and issues that the IT teams are having to deal with today.
That point about performance is a really good one. One of the things that we've seen a lot is actually the rollouts of Microsoft Office 365. That time and time again, we'd hear how they prototype it often at the central office, and even before the pandemic. And then people were ecstatic. Hey, this works really well. This is great. But then as soon as they'd roll it out to either a remote office or people who were working from home, if they were requiring people to connect in over a VPN, the response was almost uniformly, wow, who thought this was possibly a good idea? This is so slow. This is, this is horrible. and that's really routed, that performance issue then is really sort of, based in the fact that people were having to connect into a central office, go through security gateways that are there at the central office, and then back out onto the internet again, instead of doing what Microsoft says, which is go as straight as possible from the user onto the internet through local broadband and then up into the cloud. And so, that became the poster child in many cases for, these issues of performance. If you tie that then to usability, the stories that you sort of heard from people not really, who don't have a background in networking, having to try to figure out, well, let me see, when does the VPN work? How do I deal with it if it doesn't work? So, and all of those challenges. When we look at some of these challenges, one of the issues that seems to come up is, well, beyond letting all the bad stuff in that you were talking about, just why is it as well that you need to do more than just being sure that someone has logged in with the right passwords and typed in the right one-time code. The bad stuff that potentially is on their endpoint device, because let's face it, when we're working remotely, we're probably not bouncing back and forth between our personal device and our work device when we want to go order dinner or check on something. We're also seeing sort of a change in many organizations, aren't we, about how they think of that access. That it used to be, hey, go roam around and find this app on the internal network. And now organizations are they're looking for more visibility and control. And so, as people architect their networks, is this playing a bigger and bigger role? The ability to go from, hey, anything you happen to find you can use, to, no, you have to be explicitly authorized to use that application.
Yeah, I absolutely, Jim. When I think about, again, this, think over the past year, this remote model that we've all been, has been a huge success. I mean, I think it started off really rough for a lot of corporations, but as time went on and people got their footing under them, I feel like this remote model is here to stay. And we're all really excited about getting out and about, and getting to communicate and collaborate with our peers. So I think when the pandemic lifts, people can get out and about, you're going to see a mad rush to want to get back to the office for a period of time, get out and about. But I think what will stick is much more of a hybrid model, where a lot of knowledge workers will work remotely, some will go into the office, and that'll be the new norm. And I think, as you stated, Zero Trust provides the visibility and control of our data and apps, whether people continue to work remotely or even when they're in the offices, when we didn't used to think that way. Mm-hmm. App control, network segmentation, all of that is going to be more crucial moving forward to prevent the spread of threats. So I think Zero Trust, which we tend to use it analogously with remote worker, that mindset is actually going to find its way into the remote offices and buildings and all of that. It's here to stay for sure.
I think you're spot on, and even as in our company, we're talking about how people who used to go into a dedicated office, a cubicle, well, that's not what life's going to be anymore. In fact, it's going to be shared hoteling spaces where you find an empty spot of desk and connect in, most likely over Wi-Fi rather than plugging into the network. And the old days aren't coming back, and it's going to look like a remote situation. The only thing being different is, you're sitting in a chair that happens to be in the building, perhaps along with some other people temporarily, but from an IT perspective, it really will all be remote. And so that ability to have visibility and control that follows the user wherever they work, whether it's at home, in the office, or even once people begin traveling again. So
I agree.
cool. When we look at sort of that definition of SASE as a platform, zero trust network access, ZTNA is a key part of it. But one of the things I've found to be intriguing is that when you start looking at the other things that are part of a SASE architecture, things like remote browser isolation, RBI, data protection and controls over data moving sort of up from the user and data moving towards the user. There are a lot of very interesting things that will suddenly become possible with a SASE approach to doing zero trust network access. I think we're just at the beginning of a real sea change in how people get to the resources that they depend upon. So.
Yeah, I agree. Jim, for me, SASE is becoming both the access control point for remote workers, but it's also starting to aggregate into a unified policy engine. And with zero trust now part of a SASE platform, I think it's safe to assume we'll see more and more zero trust principles applied across any type of access control point, whether it be the web, cloud, email, et cetera. So for me, it seems very natural to assume we'll see other parts of SASE like RBI integrated into zero trust to provide even a better layered level of control moving forward.
I think that's actually a really great capstone to our conversation today, is that ultimately the goal of SASE is exactly what you just hit on, Vince, is the notion of being able to write policies once and enforce them wherever is appropriate to enforce. And so regardless of whether an application is in an internal data center, up in a private cloud, or as a SaaS app, or as a generalized web app, that ability to specify controls in a way that's a lot more like how we do things in the real world. You don't think of trying to enumerate every different combination. Right. Get out of control really fast, but taking a much more common sense approach. And that to me is really the beauty of where SASE is going and the potential that it has for really simplifying and strengthening security for businesses and government agencies, large and small. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Vince Spina, again, the Senior Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Forcepoint, who has a perspective that truly is global in nature for how organizations, whether commercial businesses or government agencies, are applying SASE technologies and looking to enable their people to be productive and safe wherever they need to work. With that, thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Jim. Always a pleasure.
Welcome to Connecting and Protecting Branch Offices in a Cloud World. I'm Jim Fulton, Director of SASE and Zero Trust Solutions at Forcepoint. And today I'm joined by Kat Allen, Solution Lead for Firewalls and SD-WAN at Forcepoint. Kat, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jim. I'm excited to be here.
So SASE brings networking and security together so that people can be connected and protected uniformly, no matter where they're working, at home, remote, or in an office. Branch sites in particular are seeing really rapid changes in how they're connected to the rest of the enterprise and to the data that they need, aren't they?
Absolutely. So that's where SD-WAN comes in, also known as software-defined wide area networking. So our SD-WAN is actually built into our network firewall solution, which allows you to consolidate vendors so that you aren't having different patchwork point products that don't necessarily work together. And it allows you to directly connect those branch offices to the internet, and also offers a lower cost than a traditional MPLS.
So how does this change how people are managing that connectivity. If they're no longer using MPLS to connect in and are connecting directly to the internet, what is it being managed by software, or how is that done now?
Yes, so it's managed through software, hence the SD-WAN. And we also offer really great features such as our Easy Connect, which can help you expedite those deployments, as well as our VPN broker, which basically, when you're talking about things like networking, when you get into large scale deployment models, you're talking really complex and really cumbersome infrastructures, which can be very hard to manage over time and can quickly get out of hand. So what we've done is we've created a VPN broker, which essentially is a very smart connect system that says, I know exactly where I need to go, and I'll make those connections as needed. And then over time, if they aren't necessarily needed, then it'll also terminate those connections, which then feeds back to that whole idea of zero trust. Because essentially, the less connections you have just sitting out there open, especially if you don't need them, that basically increases your attack vector. So things like our VPN broker is a really great option, especially if you're trying to connect things like retail or branch offices. You don't want those open connections just sitting out there waiting for, somebody to basically go and try to attack them.
Cool. And so with SD-WAN, then you've got branches connected directly to the internet the same way roaming users are. How does security work in that situation?
Right. So basically, they're connecting through that SD-WAN connection versus going through that traditional MPLS. And basically, that offers things like resiliency and failover connection, so that if for whatever reason, one of your connections failed, you'll still have a backup. So when we're talking about things like OT or operational technology, it's very imperative that, you don't have a POS system go down. You don't have a big type of machinery on a manufacturing line go down. So SD-WAN really offers that connectivity and that resiliency that allows you to maintain that business continuity.
So what kinds of security do you have to then pair with that SD-WAN that traditionally might have been done on premise?
Right. So starting with our network firewall, that's really kind of your first line of defense. I always say, not that I'm a big fan of sports analogies, but I always like to say it's kind of like your defensive line. Everybody likes to talk about the quarterback. He makes the most money. He's usually the very talented player, but at the same time, he couldn't do his job if you didn't have that defensive line in front of him, blocking and tackling all of those incoming threats. So essentially, you can think of that like our network firewall. And then our network firewall also plays really great into our other solutions that are built to have that, that are built to kind of interoperate together. So you can pair it with things like web security, our cloud access security broker, and all of our different products to really kind of create that true zero trust architecture.
Cool. And so, it sounds like then each branch site then is able to automatically connect into the cloud, into a SASE architecture, if you will, in order to get web security, cloud security. What about access to internal private applications that you used to have to VPN into the enterprise for? Do you still have to do that?
Right. So we actually do have a solution for that called private access, and you can actually deploy that from a cloud. We also have what we like to call private access local, which is, again, built into that network firewall. So you could run it on-prem as well. And the really great thing about our network firewall specifically in terms of a SASE architecture is that it really gives you that flexibility. So whether you want to deploy it in a data center, or you want to deploy it in the cloud, or you want to do some sort of hybrid infrastructure, you can deploy it wherever you want it because it's a software-centric firewall and it was designed that way from day one.
And so being software-centric, what are some of the nice things that come of that? That it sounds like you've taken a different approach than most other hardware-focused firewall companies.
Absolutely. So things like zero touch deployment. So one thing we've heard from our customers time and time again is that our firewall has really given them back that quality of life that they're looking for in their job. So traditionally, if you know of anybody in your life who's a network administrator like I do, they're typically at data centers every Friday, some Saturdays, and occasionally Sundays as well, because they're running deployments. They want to make sure that they aren't interrupting the normal Monday through Friday work that all of us kind of do that 8 to 5. So they're usually stuck doing their updates and their installs on the weekends. But with our firewall, we designed it so that you can push automatic updates across entire fleets of firewalls without having to send somebody on site. So what we really aim to do with our network firewall is to provide that better user experience, but to also make sure that we're taking into mind, these people who are actually using this product day in and day out, and how can we make their lives better with our product.
And this isn't, we've talked a lot about sites, but it's not just physical sites, is it? It's also virtual cloud sites as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we actually have very innovative integrations with the major cloud providers, such as Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. And we're always kind of building and expanding what those integrations do. So it allows you to really expand those capabilities as well as maximize your investment in your infrastructure, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on-prem, or whether it's some sort of in-between hybrid model.
Nice. So it sounds like from the perspective of SASE that really we have the overarching architecture of having a variety of different networking and security services based in the cloud, with local enforcement and this integration of the SD-WAN networking, the network security within the firewalls, but then seamlessly tying into the SASE cloud-based web cloud and other types of security. Is that a good summary of how it all works?
Absolutely. And also, I just wanted to add to that, Jim, as you know, we are pioneers in SD-WAN. We also are pioneers in the intrusion prevention system and advanced malware detection space. So our network firewall actually recently just got a AAA rating from cyberratings.org, which is the top rating you can achieve. So we take a lot of pride in the security efficacy of our network firewall, and we really believe in the product that we are selling.
What are some of the other issues that people should be looking for as they're looking at network security, particularly given how rapidly the world has changed in the last year and the dependence on remote networking and the integration of what's happening out at the site on an endpoint all the way in? Are there issues like privacy and other things that people need to be on the lookout for?
Absolutely. So all of these recent government regulations, things like GDPR, things like CCPA, and really a lot of the pending regulation that we're starting to see coming out of the federal as well as your local governments. We take a lot of pride in the fact that we believe in privacy by design. So we actually have a dedicated privacy ops team. And we also have a web page on our website that's completely dedicated to transparent policies around how all of our products work, how they handle things like PII, and what our entire company viewpoint and stance is on privacy, because we do want to make sure that our customers understand that we understand it's important, and we understand it's important to your customers as well. And so we believe in transparency, and we have a dedicated team to really kind of be on the forefront of that and be on the lookout for it and make sure that we're designing our products appropriately and to be respectful of individual privacy.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Kat. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed hearing how some of the initial work in convergence really began with networking and security coming together in these types of appliances, and how that same technology now is being integrated with the cloud to really provide an end-to-end solution. So again, thank you very much. With Kat Allen, solution lead for network security and SD-WAN at Forcepoint. Hello, and welcome to today's session on safeguarding the usage of data uniformly everywhere. I'm Jim Fulton, Director of SASE and Zero Trust Solutions at Forcepoint, and today I have the pleasure of sitting with Eric Skoralick, one of our senior global consulting solutions engineers here at Forcepoint, with a deep background in data protection, in SASE technologies, and in general, enabling organizations to use information efficiently and safely. So with that, Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. My pleasure to be here with you.
So a lot of SASE platforms focus on access, and we covered this in some of the earlier sessions. But that's only half the picture. The whole point of SASE is really to enable people to work anywhere and to use data, whether it's intellectual property, whether it's critical information, and to use it safely, which means that it's not enough to just provide safe access, for example, to a spreadsheet inside an application, but to actually retain control of what can be done with that spreadsheet even after it's downloaded. And that's where zero trust really helps set the stage here. Eric, you've been involved in a variety of different data protection deployments over the years. What are some of the key issues that people have been looking at, especially in the last year, as they're helping people work from home safely?
Yeah, definitely. So that's one of the things. Whenever we're talking about SASE, people are talking about secure access. But after the access, you have access to the data, and the data is maybe your data is the crown jewels. You have many data, IP data, patent data, or PCI data, or patient data. There's all kinds of data. And data today is really easy to create data. You have cloud applications, you have Office, you have Google Suite, you have many ways to create data. So understanding what kind of data these users are transferring, downloading, uploading, and tracking that. And also tracking that not just in the perspective of content inspection, but also understand the user context, start understanding the user behavior across his behavior daily basis, monthly basis, or even if the user has changed his behavior, he's looking for a new job, he's looking for something, he's trying to copy too much data to a USB that he has never done before. So we're never talking about DOP, the traditional DOP. We're looking just for content inspection. We're looking just for applying policy to that group, but we're now looking for risk levels. We're now looking for risk scores. So one of the things that we're looking at a lot in conversations with customers is changing that shift from a traditional DOP to a more modernized DOP, data protection policy, that your applying policy is not just based on the content inspection, but also based in the user behavior and the user context. So it would be shifting from one to many policies to a one-on-one policy. You and I can be in the same policy. However, if I start being risky, my policies start changing. So that's one of the things we're looking for a lot in the conversations, and that's where we're driving our conversations to.
It sounds like the essence of this is really to connect the dots across behaviors, whether it's the user's behaviors, even the data's behaviors, in order to really bring a new level of automation and personalization to security. Is that a fair summary of it?
It is a fair summary, because many things we see in the DOP implementations are customers not blocking. And the reason why they're not blocking is because DOP is impacting the business. DOP is blocking the business to work. So one of the things we're shifting that, let's not block when it's not necessary. Let's keep the business as usual. But whenever someone starts changing their behavior, we need to start maybe user coaching, or maybe encrypting the data, or maybe getting some other gates around that data to not go out. So that's one of the things that it's a fair assumption. That's where it's moving customers that they have DOP deployed, they have data protection solutions deployed, but they're not blocking. They're afraid to block because they're afraid to stop the business. And business cannot stop. Business needs to keep working, but it's risky to not block. It's risky to not understand what is really going on.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, as well, what's happening is we're seeing a shift that in some ways mirrors what people do in the real world, meaning, you allow people to get their jobs done. You don't put a whole lot of restrictions on them unless you see them make a mistake. You trust your people, but you set up guardrails. And if they do make mistakes, if they do show bad judgment, at some point you begin to apply tighter and tighter controls. It sounds like this new approach to data protection is really bringing how you work in the real world into the digital world.
Exactly. You don't stop people to work, but you start putting more gates, more blocks whenever they start doing a lot of things. So one example is, let's say, monitoring myself, and we're looking for how much data Eric transferred to USB or to or download from a network file share monthly basis. If he changed his behavior, if I change my behavior next month, now I start copying more data. Why Eric's copying more data? Why he's downloading that kind of data he has never downloaded before? So it's important to know why things are happening, and then you start changing things based on what your behavior is, whatever you're trying to do. So there's a lot of scenarios that we can apply that, a lot of use cases we can apply, or even would say a whitelist policy. Someone created a DLP whitelist policy, allow you to copy to USB. You're allowed to copy to USB, but most of the customers are not really blocking. You're giving no protection, no gates. You're allowing people to copy whatever they want in USB. But what if that user becomes dangerous? What if the user is looking to leave the company, stealing IP data, patent data, is engineering with some important project? So it's important not to have the 1 and 0. It's important to have a flexibility. I change the policy across the DLP in a platform, but based in the context, based in not just in the content, but based in the context. That way, you shift the mindset. You're allowing business to work, and then you're allowing things to happen, and you're also protecting the IP, which is the most important for many companies. Every company, they have their certain crown jewels data, so it's important to protect those crown jewels.
Right. And how this all ties into SASE, of course, is that with people working in many different locations, there was a lot of talk about the hybrid workforce, with people working from home a few days, eventually working in an office, perhaps even traveling. That need to protect data seamlessly, enforcing the same policies everywhere, is becoming more important than ever. And that's the real tie-in with SASE, is that SASE is becoming sort of the best way to deliver that data protection everywhere, from the endpoint through the network into the web and cloud, and to ensure that you're not having to have different systems for securing data in one place, the cloud, versus on an endpoint, versus within your internal network. And that's really what we see as one of the fundamental differences about how we're doing SASE, is we're taking a data first approach and putting exactly this kind of data protection really at the center of what SASE is all about. So it's about access and usage together. Now, one of the things that SASE also was really created for was to simplify the operations of security. And so in many ways, the same notion of simplifying operations seems like it's carrying over to what you're describing as the next generation of data protection. So not only are we delivering that data protection seamlessly in many different locations, but in a way, we're really starting to see that reputation that DLP had for being complex and difficult, now getting replaced with a much more streamlined approach, such as what you outlined. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, it's really important to have unified policy management. Whenever you're talking about a data protection program, you have a unified way to identify data, to block data across different channels. It just makes it easier for a company, even a company that don't have that many number of FTEs to monitor the system. You have the unified policy management, unified incident management, really help in a daily basis. Another thing is really important as well is the data classifiers, how those data classifiers work to identify data. So it's not just because it's a 16-digit number, it is a credit card number. Not every 16-digit number is a credit card number. So it's really important the way you reduce the number of false positives, checking other things, not just the numbers, but checking if there's a first name, last name, CVV. So that's really important, because imagine if you have a false positive. Imagine if you have a false positive, one false positive per user, and you have 100,000 users, and then times 30 days, then times a year. How many incidents do you have more just because of false positives? Can you analyze all those incidents? So that's another important thing. Policy, unified policy, reducing the burden of false positives, and then the third thing is unified incident management across all the channels. One single click, you enable all the DLP policy you want for all the channels you want. Endpoint channel, cloud channel, network channel, anywhere. So having data protection anywhere is really important.
Right. And that's why we're seeing things like what Forcepoint is doing with our data protection service that enables that exact same engine, in fact, to enforce those policies in your web security gateway, in your cloud access security broker, in your email channels as well. So it's really about bringing that SASE view of reinventing technologies that used to be really dispersed throughout your organization, reinventing them as converged services that can be delivered via the cloud, that can integrate with the endpoint, that again can really simplify the problem and get to what it's ultimately all about. Because when you, at the end of the day, cybersecurity is fundamentally about making sure that people can get to and safely use the data that they need to transform their business. Now, we had a couple of questions come in during the session, and so we want to tackle those. First up, someone was asking, don't most SASE platforms have data protection built into them? I'll start, and then Eric, I'd love your thoughts on this. So sure. Every vendor is going to claim that they have some amount of data protection in there. It's actually part of the SASE diagrams that you see from Gartner and so forth. But the difference is whether it's real or whether it's things like really rudimentary pattern matching, looking for credit card numbers or social security numbers or other very simplistic forms of information. In contrast, what makes a data-first SASE approach different is really incorporating the kinds of data loss prevention technologies that Eric was describing and taking it all to a whole new level. So it's not about the really trivial stuff that you see in a lot of cloud-based web gateways, for example, but it's having the real enterprise class data protection that's able to work with behavioral intelligence, that's able to then work consistently across all of those different channels of communication.
That's definitely a great point, Gene. And it's a comparison of you have a feature or you have a solution. And what a Forcepoint has is a solution, not a feature. It's not a feature of one channel. It's actually a solution where you have no limitations whatsoever. If you want to apply a unified policy, apply across all the channels. So that's the main difference. There's vendors out there, they're features. And that's where we are differentiate. We're not a feature. Our bread and butter is data protection. That's where we're investing a lot. And it's where we're investing a lot in how to identify data. We have data scientists researching how to make our classifiers to identify cracker even better. We're checking for first name and last name close to the cracker number, CVV close to the cracker number, expiration date. So it's not just the 16 digits. If you type 16 times 1, that will not be a cracker number for us. But it may be in other solutions, it will be a cracker number. For us, no, that's like not a real cracker number. So that's one of the things that we check in the system.
And let's see, another question here. We're conscious of your time, but someone was asking, so how does zero trust play in here? And this is a really good question, because one of the things that we're seeing with SASE and zero trust is that this is the first time in the IT industry in which two very, I would say, popular and rapidly growing approaches to security have actually converged and come together. So you have Gartner, who really created SASE, endorsing the zero trust principles for doing security. Conversely, you had Forrester, who really has been promoting zero trust for the last 10 years. Now with Zero Trust Edge, really saying, yep, a SASE approach really is the right way for delivering zero trust. And when you then look at how NIST, the standards body here in the United States, has started to actually put together formal standards for doing zero trust that incorporate the need to go beyond access to focus on controlling usage and to continuously monitor that usage. You see that all of these pieces are beginning to come together. And so where 2 years ago, we had a lot of people saying, well, what should I pay attention to? Is the future going to be SASE? Is it going to be zero trust? And the answer is the future is really coming together. It's a SASE architecture, a SASE platform for delivering security that implements zero trust principles. And that's the essence of combining access and usage together in a data-first SASE solution. In the final episode of our 5 Steps to SASE series, we're going to look at something that's a little bit different about the role that continuous monitoring is now playing in zero trust solutions and therefore in SASE solutions. I'm Jim Fulton, Senior Director of SASE and Zero Trust Solutions here at Forcepoint. And today, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Sean O'Sullivan, one of Forcepoint's global experts in data protection and insider risk solutions. Sean, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
So identity is one of the foundations for security, but with people working outside the office, many of our customers are telling us that they're finding it much harder than ever before to really know who's at the other end. It used to be that we often relied on the fact that people would go by a receptionist or a security guard, or that people walking down the halls would recognize someone who seemed out of place. Obviously, we don't have that when we're all sitting at home. Why is it that relying upon logging in and passwords and other credentials just aren't enough?
Well, if you think about the way the paradigm has shifted, in the old model, like you said, many times you're relying on that physical interaction between people to determine whether or not that person was acting normal, who they were, where they were supposed to be at that time. From the SOC perspective, if you also think about it, we had a walled garden, so to speak, right? So all of your activity was happening behind the perimeter, inside the network that they controlled, and they were able to keep things out and control what goes in and out through their wall. Nowadays, as the world has changed and evolves, especially with the recent events, people are moving around the earth, people are moving around the world, day to day, all in real time. And that means the perimeter is now shifted to the user themselves, which means it's actively changing depending on what they're doing at that time and place. And so as a user moves throughout their day, they could be in a coffee shop, they could be in their home office, they could even be back at their home headquarters. But things are changing throughout the time, and without understanding what a normal behavior looks like, and really almost kind of constantly checking to make sure that user is behind that keyboard, it's really hard to tell. And so what a lot of these companies and identity providers are doing are basically doing what we call step-up authentications or constant check-ins to make sure is the user's activity normal for what we would expect that person to be doing, and does that coincide with the access that they have or should have based on those locations and those types of behaviors.
So what are some of the things that you can look for that would tell whether or not someone is a legitimate user?
Yeah, so typically, a person doing their normal day-to-day has similar routines, right? They're going to be accessing the same type of files, they're going to be logging in around the same times, talking to the same type of people. Anything, once their baseline behavior, as we like to call it, starts to change a little bit, you can then start to look at a little bit closer with a magnified glass to understand is this person traveling? Are they supposed to be in a different country than maybe where they were, 6 or 7 hours earlier? Are their emails coming out at normal times? Are they, interacting with the data that they normally do, as well as the access to the sites they normally do? And once that begins to deviate outside of what the normality is, we then begin to take that data and look at it a little bit closer, right? And so what does that data and what does that kind of behavior tell us about what that user is experiencing at that time, and whether or not that user could potentially not be that user at that keyboard?
So it sounds like the essence of this is to really continuously monitor the behavior of the person, the behavior of the data itself, and to, in fact, look at external activities, not just the particular thing in the moment. This is the kind of thing that it sounds like that NIST is calling out in their standard for zero trust that they published last year. Is that the case?
Yeah, exactly. And so, one thing that's enabled us to reach this point, to reach NIST, to be able to release these kinds of guidelines is that our visibility is unprecedented nowadays. If we talk going back to the old paradigm, is we didn't have the same type of logging and monitoring capabilities that we do have today. The insight allows us to really take a closer look at what users are doing in real time to understand and continuously monitor and evaluate that behavior. So without that visibility, you aren't able to make those decisions and have the confidence behind those decisions to actually start to automate and enforce some of the changes that may be required based on those behavioral deviations. So, it's really, the paradigm shift from both the perimeter, moving from internal to external, as well as the visibility just becoming that much better, and our confidence in that automation becoming that much better. So
in fact, automation is really the key here. You mentioned this several times, but there have historically been a lot of different technologies out there that may look at behaviors or may try to do point comparisons. One of the early uses of SIMs was in theory to do that, but it was always manual. What's different today, that enables this kind of automation?
To be honest with you, it's the confidence in the data and the confidence in the analytics that we have driving those kind of decisions, right? So before, if you look at the data that used to be collected into a SIM, all that data was generally just raw network traffic, raw logs that didn't really correlate to a user, didn't correlate to a thing. Nowadays, with the endpoint technology out there, as well as with just general improvements in network security, we can tie those actions back to a specific user. So now that we understand that the data that's associated with that user, we can then make more educated decisions. And as those decisions continue to happen, we can then provide the system with help to determine whether or not that was the correct decision to make. And one thing to think about with automation, in the IT space, we've automated pretty much everything except for security, right? Our operations teams are automating, our cloud services are automating, everything we do is automating and automating. But until we receive this great visibility and this type of data streams from these new technologies, we haven't been able to make those behavioral decisions. And as organizations mature, and something we've seen with many of the clients that I've worked with, it's not that we're automating every single policy. We're automating maybe a small subset of policies that are generally the ones that cause the most friction within the business, because the business is trying to protect their IP, companies are trying to do employees are trying to do their job. But at the same time, those two ideologies oftentimes clash and create friction within the data protection side of risk team. If you think about a SASE platform just by itself, its main focus is looking at access and looking at what things are doing. When we add data into that field of vision, we're now able to track what that data is, because in the end, a threat actor or a threat, insider threat generally is going to go after data. No matter what, 99% of the time, they're going after your IP, they're going after some kind of data within your network. There's a small 1% that may be looking for malicious user or sabotage, but we really focus on that 99%, where if you follow the data and you follow the interaction between the people and that data, you're able to then see and control how that data is flowing, leveraging the SASE platforms that are already out there and are already great at what they do.
So one of the things that is fundamentally different about Forcepoint's approach from others is that while other solutions out there try to look at behavioral intelligence and do analysis on it, Forcepoint is actually taking it a step further, because it's not just the behaviors that define the policies. Instead, really using the behaviors to connect the dots, if you will, and understand the level of risk that those behaviors represent. And then using that risk to define policies. This really seems to be something that nobody else in the industry is doing in quite the same way. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of the things that made me most excited in the last couple of years when we introduced this concept of automated risk and that risk adaptive policy mentality. You know, it really, if you go back to thinking about how, you know, the clash between protection and people's ability to do their job, you know, that incremental ability to ratchet down the controls is really what gives us the power, because you don't want to go from 0 to 100 every time. Sometimes someone's behavior may be displaying signs of abnormality, but that's okay. You know, maybe they're performing a different role today. Maybe they're performing something that they normally don't do, but they're still within the bounds of what's okay for the organization. And it's that ability to really ratchet up step by step to control those points all the way to the end. When finally you've reached that control point to cut off full access, you're confident, you have the story behind it, you understand why that block happened, and then maybe even have the forensics evidence, you know, with the video that shows, hey, we now can see step by step why this happened, how this happened, and we support the automation behind it.
And one thing that really has struck me about this, and actually your description is really good of it, is that in many ways, what this does is to bring the way that organizations operate in the real world of saying, look, we trust people to do their jobs, you know, hey, don't be dumb, you know, go off and do things, and they'll set up some guardrails, but it's only if someone makes a mistake, shows poor judgment, do they begin to narrow the aperture down and enforce stricter and stricter controls. What Forcepoint's doing with this risk adaptive approach to protecting data is really doing that same thing of, you know, allowing people to really focus on getting their jobs done, not putting up barriers, but, you know, if over time, if someone, you know, starts doing things that they shouldn't, that again, it can not just automate, but personalize those enforcement controls to that specific individual while other people are unaffected. And so it's that combination of automation and personalization working together to bring the real world into the digital realm in a unique way. It's kind of a new take on it.
It's really cool, in my opinion. I mean, you're absolutely spot on with, you know, if you think about traditional compliance and traditional data protection, it's a one size fits all attempt, right? And what risk adaptive protection does, it gives us an individually based, you know, policy per user, right? We're changing that flip from one size fits all to individualized across the company. And that's really the only way to allow users to do the things that they need to do, right? You know, we trust our employees. This is not out here to prevent them or witch hunt them. The goal here is to make sure that everyone's working within the bounds that makes everyone productive and safe, you know, and not every opportunity is a bad opportunity. We're looking to try to educate users and help keep them in the lanes that they're supposed to be in, right? So, you know, think about a use case where the step one is just education, right? There's a pop-up that says, hey, you know, this is generally not something we like to do. Are you sure you want to do that, right? Just to make sure that they kind of take a second to think about it, and maybe they didn't mean to do it, or maybe they didn't know that was the policy, right? So if we start off with education, we find that it one reduces the amount of risk that the company has. It reduces the burden on the IT staff and reduces the frustrations on the users. So starting with education and then ramping up from there into protection is a common, you know, way that we show value, and we've seen a lot of our customers provide value to their employee base. So.
And one of the things that really struck me about it, as we were talking in the past about this, is that it's not even just saying policies per user, because, you know, if you've got 10,000, 50,000 users, you know, you're not going to be wanting to define individual, you know, Fred at this time at this. And in fact, when you look at the number of people times the number of applications times the number of locations, number of situations, it spirals out of control. That the real beauty of it is that you define policies in terms of situations, in terms of risk, low, medium, high, you know, perhaps, and that the system does the automatic fitting, making all of that very dynamic, so that instead of having thousands or tens of thousands of policies, you may have, you know, even just a handful, but that they get sort of focused in, almost a laser-like focus on where they're needed. And that's the real power of it.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the coolest parts. One of the coolest things about my role here is that I've gotten to experience that in the real world. Right? We've actually reduced the number of policies and security policies that companies have, because, like you said, it no longer needs to be a policy for every single person, for every single thing. You can have a generalized thing. I don't want this type of data to go to these types of applications. And the behavioral part of it, the analytics part of it, will then understand, based on that user, based on what that user is doing, what type of restrictions or non-restrictions that user should be experiencing. And so it's, you're spot on when you say it actually reduces the overall policy footprints, as opposed to the previous time. Because in the past, we're in alert overload, right? There's too many alerts, there's too many policies, and it just becomes overbearing for analysts to be able to handle. So,
and so if we look at sort of closing the loop here, because we've been looking at 5 steps to SASE. The importance of protecting data is really what connects all of it, because at Forcepoint we have a point of view that cybersecurity is fundamentally about enabling people to not just get to, but to also use data safely. And so SASE provides a way of delivering that data protection across every channel and in every location, so that your data can stay safe everywhere, even as your people work everywhere. So really what we're seeing is that zero trust, which is all about making sure that you never sort of open the doors to things, but also that you continuously pay attention to what is done with that data. That zero trust and SASE really are 2 sides of the same coin. And so that continuous monitoring that NIST mandates for zero trust makes it all flow together. So
yeah, absolutely. I think, honestly, in my opinion, I think the combination of zero trust, SASE, as well as with the data protection focus, is instead of closing doors, we're opening doors, right? If we know where things are going, we know what's happening, we don't have to close any doors as long as they are where they're supposed to be. It empowers users. It doesn't hinder users. So I'm very excited about it. It's been great to see it come to life and experience it every day. So.
I think that's a good summary about it. That all of this, when we talk about data first SASE, is that it really is focused on how we empower people, especially in these times where we're about to see almost as big of a change happening in the world as we saw last year, in the sense that we're seeing people go from only working at home, which many organizations sort of then optimized how they connected and protected people, to now a much more complicated situation in which people are going to be working from home a few days, then perhaps working in an office a few days, and even traveling once again. And so making sure that connectivity and security can follow the user, can follow the data, no matter where it is, outside, inside, even behind someone else's defenses. That's the future of cybersecurity. And that's why our focus really is on what we call data first cybersecurity, being able to put data protection at the core so that data stays safe everywhere.
I couldn't agree more. I think you summed it up perfectly.
Thank you, Sean. Really appreciate being able to spend a little bit of time with you today. Again, Sean O'Sullivan, one of Forcepoint's global experts on data protection and insider risk solutions. To see SASE and Zero Trust as a service in action, go to forcepoint.com/SASE. With Forcepoint's data-centric SASE, your people can work anywhere while you keep your business safe everywhere.